Hello and welcome to The Green Room by Deloitte. This is the podcast where we ask the tricky questions about the world around us. I'm George Parrett, and today we're asking, is it tough at the top? Thank you so much for downloading this week's episode, and this week it's a bit of a special episode actually, because I'm joined by both Ethan Worth and Lizzie Elston as co-hosts. So,
lucky you.
How are you guys? You well?
Very well, thank you.
Yeah, really good, thanks.
And we've got this question, is life tough at the top? And we have a special guest with us today to tackle this question, who hopefully has some idea of what that means. And Lizzie, do you want to introduce me?
Yes, I've got the pleasure of introducing David Sproul. David has been the Chief Executive of Deloitte UK for the last 8 years and was the first ever CEO of Deloitte Northwest Europe. He's led our firm through 8 years of consecutive growth, and he's faced his fair share of challenges along the way. This week, he'll be helping us answer our latest big question, is it tough at the top? Thanks for joining us, David, and welcome to the Green Room.
Pleasure to be here, looking forward to it, thank you.
Just to start us off, I'm going to have an icebreaker question.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll reach into our bucket now and see what this is. Okay, so what does your dream Friday night look like?
Oh my goodness, dream Friday night. Actually, I love going out to dinner with friends on a Friday night. I just find, when I was out just last Friday with 6 of us, I just find Friday, the release is just, I mean, in some reason Saturday you're expected to be a bit more prepared and a bit more sort of topical and a bit more conversation. Friday evening is just brilliant. So Friday evening for me is out for dinner with friends, let your hair down, no one has too high expectations, end of the week, and just enjoy oneself.
Yeah, I think it is that great feeling, isn't it? Yeah, and I think if you do something on a Friday night, then it makes the weekend a bit longer as well, doesn't it? So,
no, you're right. No, you've kicked off the weekend well. And I think there is something about it. Maybe it's just my friends have low expectations of me on a Friday night, but there is something about, you know, everyone is in that sort of relaxed mode on a Friday, and you're there just to unwind, you know, download, enjoy yourself, and you don't have to, you know, have the most erudite conversation or the most, you know, articulate view of Brexit, whatever it is. So that's perfect Friday evening.
Yeah. An evening without Brexit.
And you're all invited for my next Friday.
Oh, great.
We'll hold you to that.
Yeah, I think it's really about the company you keep as well, I suppose, and how good it is. So, yeah. Lizzie, do you do something similar on Friday nights?
I think my dream Friday night would be, you know, private helicopter landing and whisking me off, I don't know, the Maldives.
Oh,
but
nice.
failing that, probably a combination of dinner with friends, but maybe throwing in a theatre trip as well.
Yeah, nice.
I'd like to. I don't get to the theatre very often anymore. I'd like to do a bit
So
more of
who's
that.
been to see Hamilton yet? Anyone been to see Hamilton?
No.
I'm
it's on my
seeing next
list.
month, actually.
Oh, yeah?
It was a Christmas present for my wife.
I have seen it.
Have it?
Have you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
I
brilliant.
wasn't quite prepared for the full singing the whole way through.
No.
So,
But I went with my 2 daughters, my wife and my 2 daughters, and there was something for everyone. I mean, it's just one of those things that you're just taken in.
yeah,
And even whether you know the story or not, I mean, it's riveting. So it's great.
yeah.
I haven't got
Top
what's
tip.
your favourite musical on here, actually.
No. Well, I've answered that. There we
Yeah,
go.
so
Of the moment.
Yeah, I thought you were a Mamma Mia kind of guy, but Hamilton's good. Great. Well, let's sort of dive into this week's big question then, and you know, is life tough at the top? And I suppose you're coming to the end of your time as CEO of Deloitte, David, and I guess the most obvious place to start is, you know, what are you most proud of in your time here?
It's a really good question, and obviously I am starting to reflect on it. I mean, people often ask me, "What's your legacy?" And I think legacy is an overused word, but you do start to reflect on, you know, what are you proud of? What have you achieved? And I was out with for lunch with Ian Powell, who was the PwC leader who retired a couple of years ago, and he encouraged me to think about it, because he said, the moment after you finish, you're finished. You know, that's it. It's gone. You don't have time to reflect. So I have been reflecting on it. There's a few things. I mean, our firm is so broad and so complex. There's no one thing you can point to and say, that's it. There are 2 main things, but I go all the way back to when I started. I sort of laid out a plan to focus on 3 big things. One was relationships with our people, relationships globally, and relationships with our clients. And it sounds a bit trite now to talk about it in that sense, but that's really where it was. And I suppose when I reflect on where we are as a firm, and you know, we come back, you know, me personally, I think the 2 things that I am proud of is how we've led in globalizing our organization. We've just announced, you know, recently about our combination with Deloitte Mediterranean. That creates a very different set of opportunities for our people. and how we have changed the dialogue about that relationship with our people, and credit to Emma and others who've really pushed that. But in terms of being transparent in talking about what our people expect of their careers, respect, inclusion, I feel we're a very different organisation to we were when I came in. And those two things I'm really proud of. And the other thing that's just worth saying is you recognise that, you know, in this role you have a certain period of time. And, you know, I've had that 8 years, and that's 8 years. You know, our firm's been here 175 years. So that's my 8 years, that's my contribution that's advanced us a little bit further than we were before.
Is there anything you would have done differently, David?
There's lots I would have done differently. You know, it's really, you know, anyone who claims that they got everything right is either deluded or lying. I mean, no one gets everything right. So there's lots I would have done differently. And I think one of my skills, I think, is I'm prepared to listen to that advice. And even in this role, people do still come up to me and say, you know, I think you got that wrong, which I think is great that people have that, you know, ability to do that. So there are lots of things. I don't think there's anything big, Lizzie. I don't think there's anything I'd look back and say, I wish we really hadn't taken that direction. But there's lots of things I'd have done differently. There's lots of decisions I'd have made differently with a different set of facts or hindsight. But there's nothing I reflect on now and said, I wish we'd taken a different route, or I wish we'd pursued something else, or I wish we'd prioritised a materially different way.
When you were talking about what you're proud of, you said about the respect and inclusion, and recently you chose to speak out about that. So I was just wondering why you decided to make that decision to speak about it so publicly.
It was more the opportunity than a deliberate choice to do it. So if you step back, we were very clear that we had to be transparent about what we believed in, and that whole issue around respect and inclusion, particularly as it was portrayed, you know, the Me Too movement and how we treat that sort of behaviour, we were very clear how to be transparent. The actual sort of event of publicising just came out of an interview. So the FT journalist was in doing basically a background interview on a whole raft of things around the CMA and the audit market structure. And then she asked some questions around this, and I'm a great believer in you have to be very honest and transparent. So I was speaking to her about our views and what we do, and that really triggered in her a desire to write something about it. So the interview was probably about 2 months before the article, and she came back and said, I wanted to write something about this. Would you be prepared to answer a few more questions? We gave her a few more facts, and she wrote the article. You know, we don't write the headlines, but actually I'm very proud of it, because I think there is something about not just doing the right thing, taking the right actions, but being prepared to talk about it. Some people found it uncomfortable. I got some voicemails from some of our partners who would rather I hadn't portrayed it in that way, but frankly, I think they're wrong. You have to be transparent. So it wasn't that we went out of our way to make that announcement, but when the opportunity was there, we thought we should get on the front foot and frankly be prepared to be very clear what we stand for and the action we'll take.
Yeah, and I think you can see by the response from some of the other firms that it was kind of a leading by example step.
Yeah. No, others had to, and it wasn't done for that reason, but others then had to say, well, how have you responded?
Yeah.
And you know, we can't separate ourselves from society. You know, we're part of that whole debate. And if we really believe we're a lean organisation, we ought to be prepared to lead, and that's one of those issues that I'm very clear. It's just one element of respect and inclusion. Yeah, but we have to put our money where our mouth is.
And how do the following conversations with clients go on that? Does it come up with clients?
So it's really interesting, George. So the vast majority was very positive. So the amount of positive feedback we got around our willingness to talk about it, our willingness to deal with it, was really positive. There were one or two clients who came back and said, can you please confirm that one of those partners didn't work on my account? Because we have our own values and we don't want people who behave in the way we think we understand from your article. So the one or two wanted that confirmation. There were one or two who saw it in the negative sense and said, it sounds like you've got a culture problem. Privately came back to us. And again, we were able to deal with each of those and say, this isn't a culture problem. You know, we're very proud of how we deal with these things. We're not perfect. You know, we can't say that every single person in our organisation behaves perfectly all the time. But we are clear that all our people know what our expectations are, what our values are, and the vast majority behave really well, you know, most of the time. So there were one or two, and to me that was more about helping them understand. They'd misinterpreted something, didn't understand it. But the vast majority are very positive, and I think that's shown us in a leadership sense in a very real way.
Thinking about that position at the top of a company like Deloitte, it's a massive employer,
Yeah.
very large, well-known company. There's a question around, was climbing up to that position, more fun than actually being at the top?
It's I don't think it is. I think, and I've said this so many times, and I mean it. The more I say it, the more I mean it. It's the best job in the world. And I was just out at a client with Richard actually, and we were chatting to the client, and there was a CEO of a company, and I was talking to Richard on the way back. And he's now had a few months coming into it, and I think he's starting to understand why it's the best job in the world. And I genuinely believe that. The opportunities that it gives me to influence the debate, the opportunities you get to get involved in conversations you would not otherwise do, the opportunities you have to, frankly, put into practice what your beliefs are is extraordinary. So, was it exciting going through the process all those years ago? It was. There's no question. We're all very competitive. I'm as competitive as anyone. So being in a competition to win, being in a competition to progress, of course it was exciting. But being in the role, is extraordinary, and it really is. I don't want it to sound self-serving, but it's a blast. It's the greatest job I can imagine, with a real responsibility, but it's a blast. So no. So getting here was certainly worth the effort and was better than the chase.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's good. Yeah.
Was it something that you felt you wanted as soon as you joined Deloitte?
Well, not really. People joining at my time, we probably had either I'd say a more longer-term view of a career or a slightly more narrow view of a career, and that you join and say, well, this is it. I'm in this firm, and as long as I work hard and I'm good and I'm lucky, I'll keep progressing. We'll see where it takes us. But I never thought about that sense of how far would you go. I did have a test run at this. So for those who won't know, I sort of grew up in Anderson, and obviously Anderson and Deloitte came together all those years ago. So when I was at Anderson back in 2000, we had a CEO contest then, and I was one of two candidates then. At that point, I was not the winner. I was the loser. I wasn't successful, to put it that way. So probably from that point, Lizzie, when I went through that process, and the truth is, with hindsight, I was 40 at the time, not 50. With hindsight, I probably wasn't quite ready for it. And that was probably the feedback at the time, and the person selected did a really strong job and was just more experienced. But it certainly gave me a taste for, actually, I'd love to do this leadership in a very real way. Now, the opportunity came 10 years later, after everything we went through. But so maybe that was when I, in my mind, said, would I really see myself as an aspiring, CEO? Maybe. But before that, no, I think I was just in that rather boring, step by step, moving up the organisation and enjoying myself.
And were there any times on that journey where you thought, I'm going to pack this in, I'm going to move careers?
Yeah, there were, and not since I've been in this job, just to be clear. Not and again, I think it's healthy that people look outside. So I went through, and I can remember that at least twice I got to the point of having job offers. And anyone who says they never have those moments when they, either things aren't going as well as they'd like, or they're just, something else catches their eye, or someone approaches them. And I had two times that I went as far as getting offers, and in both cases, I spoke to my mentor sponsor. I was probably senior manager level at the time. And in both cases, I was persuaded that it was mad, it was short-sighted. I was, not seeing my career in the way I should be seeing it, etc. And I didn't. And obviously, who knows what would have happened? Yeah. But I don't regret not taking the roles. But I just think being prepared to challenge yourself. I'm not suggesting everyone goes off and tries to, get other job offers, but challenging yourself, is this really for you? And that's really what it was for me. It was challenging. Is there something else that would actually give me more satisfaction? What I was doing then as a tax professional. So I'm quite proud of having gone through that, and I'm also very pleased. Obviously, I was persuaded not to take those offers, or we wouldn't be sitting here. So
Indeed.
It seemed to work out well.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so far.
You sort of talk about those challenges on the way up, but
Yeah.
presumably there's quite a lot of challenges, in your role now.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's a kind of love-hate relationship when those issues, come to you, and it's a problem-solve, challenge, really, isn't it? I mean, how do you deal with that? And
It's really. I think we're very fortunate. I think most of the challenges we face are sort of positive challenges. They're choices. So there's lots of decisions I have to make, or we make as a leadership team, which are around choices, because we're like any organisation, we've got scarce resource, whether it's smart people or it's financial. We have to choose where do we invest, and there's lots of competition for that resource, be it people or money. So a lot of the decisions are those sort of decisions, and they're not always popular, because you're saying, well, we're going to invest in this, not that. We're going to back business A, not business B. And a lot of them are those sort of challenges, and those, I think, you can work on as a team. You can put, an evidence-based process around them. You can explain why you're making choice A or B. You can go back and test the payback, etc. And in many ways, that's just part of running a business. I think the tougher challenges are those where they're sort of the more negative challenges, and ultimately, the decision comes down to you. Because I always say this, that there are a number of things where ultimately you just got to make a decision. I mean, most things, there's a team. Most things you get lots of input from the business leaders or Steve Waters, quality leader, whatever it is. Ultimately, there are things you've just got to make a call, and you've got to decide. And then there's been one or two of those, and they tend to be around reputation, risk type issues, where you've got to decide, what do you do about this? How do you respond to that? And those are the only times I would say, it's not that the other decisions aren't difficult or they're tough or you've got to go through them. I'm very fortunate that I don't lose much sleep. But if there's any time I've tossed and turned a bit, it's been a couple of decisions around how do we respond to reputational risk, brand threats, things where we're having to defend our reputation. Because those are less about all the evidence bits, it's more about the emotion and how do you present this. And they are far more important. They're far more important than do we invest a bit more in audit or consulting, because they impact us all. And so those are the ones that I think in our sort of firm, and certainly my sort of role, as I think back, there's been 2 or 3 of those when you do need those moments, you're on your own. And that's the only time I think it's tough in that sort of normal sense of the word, tough or lonely, that you're left to that point. So ultimately you've got to make a decision, and you've had all the input. And that tends to be around those brand reputational risk issues. And thankfully, we don't have very many of those. So
I imagine decisions like that are pretty inextricably linked to your own principles as well.
Yeah.
So as a leader, it comes down to your principles.
No, Lizzie, I think you're right. And it also ties back to the early debate around, Me Too and how do we deal with bad behaviour. But certainly around the risk and brand, you're right, it is about principle. And I remember, I probably shouldn't name the case, but I remember one very clearly when we were being accused of something in terms of, as a firm, acting without integrity. And it's your point, Liz. It says, not only can we not accept that, but it's just not right. We don't act without integrity. This wasn't an example of us acting without integrity. We can't allow that. Whilst practically or pragmatically you may have said, we could do a deal, we could let it go, we could agree a fine, whatever it was, but it would be on the record that we'd acted in that way. And you're right, it does go to principles, both as a firm and individually. Do we believe that we act in that way? We don't, categorically don't. So you have to fight it. It may be uncomfortable fighting, it may be uncomfortable taking on a regulator or a claimant or whatever, but you have to fight it. And it does go to principle, absolutely right.
As part of the sort of preparation for this podcast, we asked our listeners to submit their own questions for you, David. And I mean, actually one of them was, have you ever been faced with a challenge where your first instinct is, I have no idea what to do? But it sounds like from what you said, actually, there's no room for drawing blanks. You have to make those tough calls.
Yeah. No, and I think in most cases, we're an extraordinary organisation. There are some extraordinarily super bright, capable people around. There aren't many problems that come across my desk that even if I don't know, someone in our organisation can't find a way through it. So being prepared to reach out for support is really important. If you think you have to make every decision on your own, then you may well end up with, I don't know where I'm going on this. And then, as we said earlier, there are those where ultimately, it just comes down, you've got to make a decision. It goes, your point is, it goes to principles. You've got all the facts, all the input. Ultimately, you've got to make that decision and stand behind it and deal with it. So I've never been in that position where I'm not sure who I'll ask about this or where I go next, or maybe I'll just go home and see if it's gone away tomorrow or something like that. So.
That would be nice.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen.
Run away.
Do you think that the structure of the firm, in the sense that the partnership element, do you think that helps with that kind of support side of things? Or
I think it does, yeah. I think it does. And it's a really interesting point, because I do think, the business model of private partnership, is something from the past, really. And I think it will get challenged as, is it the right business model for the 21st century for a tech-enabled, millennium workforce, et cetera, and it's right that it's a challenge in some ways for the future. But I think what you said, Ethan, is really important. There is something about a partnership model which gives a real responsibility to partners for the stewardship of the firm, for the success of the firm, for the next generation. And I do think the vast majority of partners feel that really seriously. I mean, really seriously, that's a responsibility. And I think that does help with that share. I've never felt alone. I've never felt I couldn't go and find some partners to help me with something. I think there is that, and I think other partners say the same, that responsibility for the health of our firm is felt in a very real way, that responsibility for the well-being of our people, but particularly around me, as the CEO, or Richard when he takes over, I think there is partners look to, well, they're there to help, and they share that responsibility. It's less in a corporate where, well, it's your job, mate, you've got the job, you work it out, and let us know the answer. There is that sense of shared responsibility.
Definitely, and I think it's interesting you say that, because the reason I asked the question is it was a response given by David, the global chairman, when we interviewed him a few weeks ago. Yeah. So I'd never really thought about it before, but it makes a lot of sense. Definitely.
No, I think a lot of partners will say in their own work environment, if they're in difficulty, personally or professionally, their partners rally around them. And I've always felt that, and I certainly feel it now. If there's a difficult issue, your team, your partners rally around it. They don't walk away and say, over to you.
Actually, we did have a partner, submit a question, which is how do you deal with stress, David, which is probably a good way to come on to, and clearly, we've been talking about potentially stressful situations, and actually, do you have any top tips for people who are faced with stress in their line of work?
I think everyone deals with it differently. I don't feel stressed. I rarely feel stressed.
Maybe that's the secret.
Maybe that is it. Yeah, maybe that is it. So, I don't worry. I feel a real responsibility. For the success of the firm. But I don't wake up in the morning worried about things. So I genuinely don't feel a lot of stress about the role. It's busy. It's active. You've got to multitask. All those things. But to me, I find that kind of reinforcing rather than stressful in a way. If there are moments when you feel, God, it's just too much on, and we all have those moments where you just think there's just too many things to get done or too many competing issues, then my own personal tip is just to take a bit of time away. I know it sounds a little bit simplistic, but it's to take a little bit of time away. I don't think problems ever get easier the more you look at them in terms of that just intensity again and again. So I do just have those simple techniques of going for a walk. Just if I'm trying to deal with something, or if I'm traveling somewhere, just try and change the environment, get out of it. But it tends to be those moments when it's just in the moment there's a bit too much going on, and it'd just be helpful to almost recalibrate your brain, is what I do. But I don't know whether it's something that is a feature of wanting to do the job, or it's something in me naturally. I've always been very fortunate that I mean, stress is unusual, is a difficult word to define. I'm not a worrier. So from that point of view, I don't wake up or come into the office worried about everything that's on, and therefore probably it doesn't manifest itself in stress in that natural way.
David, how do you balance a high-profile career with family?
I think you just do. You have to, and I think everyone does it in different ways. I mean, I've got 2 daughters. Obviously, they're now in careers. So it's slightly different, but if I think back when they were at school, I just made choices. So I didn't attend every school play or every sports, but I made sure that I got to all those I wanted to. And I think everyone has to do it differently. And I certainly found, I'd hate anyone to think that I missed all my kids' swimming galas or school, because I didn't. I went to as many as I could. And you balance. I think balance goes both ways. So I balance it by, I pick up emails, after the event or something like that. But it's critically important. And I, again, encourage everyone to make that more important or as important as the day job.
Should we talk about some of the topical issues?
Yes, yeah.
Are there any topical issues?
It's
been very quiet.
Speaking of stress, I suppose.
Well, we've talked about the your commitment to inclusion and zero tolerance policy, but of course the other big topical issue is about the audit profession.
Yep.
Under enormous amount of scrutiny. What do you think is the right answer and where we go with it?
So I think you've got to understand where this comes from, I think, and without going through the whole debate, this really comes from, a societal view that business has to do good. This is all part of the debate around trust in business and what is business for. And then there's been a trigger event called Carillion that put the audit profession in the spotlight. But if you talk to politicians, it really goes back to what is your contribution to creating a successful society? What do you do as a Big Four? What do you do, Deloitte, to create a successful society? And what do you do that compensates for when you get something wrong like Carillion? Now, that wasn't us, it was another firm. No one's yet proven that the audit firm did anything wrong. But clearly in the court of public opinion, Carillion was not a great example of audit quality, or the company having enough choice, or do audit firms act with public interest rather than self-interest. So that's really the context, and it's really difficult, because if it is a very politicized debate, and it's quite easy to write the headlines around it's a broken system, let's break up the Big Four, you've really got to try and change that narrative before you try and respond to, well, here's my answer to your problem. So I think the first thing we've been trying to do is change that narrative by talking to government, talking to BAs, talking to clients, talking to investors, about really trying to understand what do they think the problem is that they're trying to solve. What is the mischief that all of this review is about? But I think the other thing is we have to stand up and say the status quo isn't tenable. You can't just say everything's perfect. We have to evolve. And so I think where we are is trying to get the right question being asked and trying to have a response that says we do have to respond to that legitimate question around, is audit quality good enough? Is there enough choice in the audit marketplace? And are we really confident that when we say our audit business acts only to deliver audit quality, they don't get distracted by anything else and respond in that way? So that's really where our focus is. I mean, what I've said to the partners is, this isn't a quick fix. This is going to take some time. There's now 3 reviews. Donald Bryden's review in the future of audit, the CMA review in competition, John Kingman's got a regulatory review. It's going to take some time for this to play out. Our government has other things on their plate at the moment with Brexit and everything else. So this is going to be around probably the whole of this calendar year and possibly into next year, this debate. So we've got to have the stamina to deal with that. But the second thing is we have to embrace some change. We have to recognize that there's an expectation that we respond in a proactive way and embrace change. And where we think that is around being prepared to have a stronger governance around our audit business, encourage more choice. We'd love to have 6 firms rather than 4 firms, but they've got to deliver quality. Be prepared to look at our own business model and non-audit services. There's a number of things we've been proposing in our CMA, but I think the main thing is to try and lead that debate, accept there's change coming. We don't think it's change that cuts across the fundamentals of our business at all, but it will be different, and we have to recognize that, and that's responding to that sort of that public interest in terms of having a quality audit business. But the real thing is at this point that it's going to take some time. We're going to be revisiting this and debating this for the next 9-12 months. And one of the things Richard is working very hard on is to read himself in. He's been involved in the working group to date, because this is a debate he's going to have to lead as we go through the second half of this year.
And do you see, as a result of this, I mean, you don't have to answer, of course, but do you see audit in the future being a lower proportion of our business and our business model?
I think it will be, but it will still be substantial. And it's a really good question, because some of the politicians will often say audit is not important to you. And I say, look at us globally, audit is a $12 billion business. I mean, that sounds quite important to me. The fact it's now 25% of our business, whereas 10 years it will go within 50%, it's still a $12 billion business. If you look at even from the UK perspective, it's a £500 million business. It employs 4,000 people around the UK. So it's a really important business. Proportionately, it will be smaller, because audits aren't growing. Unless we totally redesign the audit product, so audits cost twice as much and we do twice as much work. I mean, the audit market just isn't growing as quickly as the advisory market. So the math will say that it will become a smaller proportion. But the really important point, Ethan, is it's still critically important to us. it's globally a $12 billion business. It's a £500 million business. And that's the point we have to get people to understand in the political world, that the fact it's a smaller proportion doesn't mean it's less important.
In our last episode, Sharon Thorne came in, who I think by the time this show airs will be our sort of incoming global chair. And she told us about her experiences with imposter syndrome, and even with someone with as enviable a CV as she has, she's sort of suffered from this. And I was just wondering whether you've ever experienced this at all, and how you've sort of kind of coped with this position, being where you are now.
I definitely have, and I think most people have. Anyone who says they've never felt that is displaying a level of self-confidence that I think is probably misplaced. I think everyone's had those moments. I certainly have, and I've tended to have them more externally than internally. So where I tend to have instances. So internally, I've always felt, at that point I got to the next role, I was ready for that role, and as we said earlier, I definitely made some mistakes, and you learn from that. I think the place I've found it is when you go into external groups, and do you really feel a peer? Little me, an accountant with in a tax professional, etc., etc. When I sit there with, CEOs of major global organisations, when I sit next to Jeff Immelt when he was CEO of GE, when you sit next to, I was with, Stephen Carter, Lord Carter, who's the CEO of Inform, one of our clients this morning. So we sit next to people who are seen as business titans in many ways, around a discussion dinner table. Do you feel you've sort of earned your place? And to me, that's when I've felt it. And you can prepare and all the rest of it, but that isn't about being prepared. It's feeling you belong there, and feeling those people think you're there as a peer as well. And certainly for me, I've certainly had instances of that where I've looked around the table and thought, God, do I really belong here? And am I contributing as much as they are? Almost to our earlier conversation about the Friday evening, when contribution levels don't have to be the most erudite. That people expect you to have a point of view. They expect you to say something. Expect you to be, articulate about whatever the issues are. And you always feel confident. Are you the first to speak or the last to speak? So for me, that's where I found it. I've been very fortunate internally that I felt very supported at every point, as I know Sharon does as well. But certainly I felt that, and as I say, I really think most people, if they're honest, will say they've had times where they're just not quite certain that they belong there, they're ready for that.
For those sort of, sometimes slightly awkward, business discussion roundtable, dinner sort of setups, do you have your go-to chat-up lines for potentially dry, dignitaries and politicians and things? Or
I think the laws, these things tend to have a starting topic. Strangely, often it's Brexit recently. But let's move on from that. Yeah. No, so I think what I tend to do is have something where I can talk about the firm in terms that they don't really think about the firm. So I'll often talk about something we're doing about social mobility or our 1 million futures or those sort of things, because guess what? Everyone's really interested. When people talk about purpose and bringing it to life, everyone's interested. They'll have differing views. Some think they'll do it well. But to me, that's one thing where, it's something that is a leveler, because no one is better at that than anyone else. Everyone is learning their way. Secondly, it gives them a perspective of our firm and me as a leader, which is different to just the business leaders. That's one thing I focus on. The other thing is just to talk. I'm very fortunate that in my role, I get given so much insight and information and thought leadership. And often I'll have a piece of thought leadership around technology or around smart cities, which again is of general application, which is good. Because if I'm at a dinner where they're talking about financial services regulation, and the US UK, for example, that's not my strong point. I'm not sure I'm going to contribute as much as some others, but the conversation will always move on from the topic of the day to something else. So those are the two things I tend to use. And certainly the first one, I just find a conversation around, purpose and how you bring that to life and how we respond to it is a real leveler. And everyone is trying to do it. And I was at a dinner with Paul Polman, who's a very outgoing CEO of Unilever, very well known as having a strong point of view on sustainability and activating purpose. And actually, we have as much to say as he does in our own way. So that's what I tend to go to.
And I think you've been quite a proponent of purpose-led organisations. I mean, it would be great. Someone actually wrote in a question as well, and how important is the 1 Million Futures campaign for you, and if you could talk around that a little bit.
I think it's really important. It's important because it sends a message. And it's really interesting we brought that in, and credit to the team who came up with the label, because we'd had purpose, we'd have our social responsibility, and we said, look, we need something that isn't just a brand name, that really unites everyone around it, because we've got multiple initiatives. And this idea of saying what we really do is we improve the lives of those who don't have the advantages we all have, be they in education or in work. And we apply the skills and the advantages we have as an organisation as well as individuals to that. And that notion of saying, so why don't we just be explicit on that? And I think the label 1 Million Futures, I think all of our people can sort of rally behind that. And the team are able to measure progress. So how we activate it, I'm very flexible on. I mean, I've been out to various schools. I've been out to I was in Leeds and Manchester and talking to the teams about what they're doing in their local communities. And I think it gives you the ability to impact people in different ways, but under that banner. And I think the real test of it is we're now applying that globally. So when Puneet talks about our global social purpose activation, he'll talk about world class. He'll also talk about 50 million futures. And he sent a message out recently. I'm not sure whether it's sent to all of our people or just partners, about an initiative in India to influence 10 million futures in India. Exactly the same principle, find some organisations to work with. So to me, it's been a great rallying call of how do we activate that purpose from a social, societal point of view. Clearly, we want purpose embedded in what we do with clients and how we interact with our people, but that societal bit, to me, it's been a really great way to activate it. And I remember at one of our partner meetings, probably 2 or 3 years ago, we had a half day where we brought in many of our people working in the 1 Million Futures, and many of our practitioners. And it was the most powerful bit of the meeting, because for many of our partners, they just didn't have the chance to interact. And there they were for half a day, and you can't but touch the heartstrings of anyone in terms of the impact we can make if we really, really work at it. So to me, it's brilliant. And it really is brilliant. And I think the impact we're having is significant.
So I volunteer on a couple of 1 Million Futures programs, and I think one of the really key reasons it's so successful is that I haven't been on a project yet where it's not been made space for that.
Yeah.
So I think it's really embedded in the firm that it's accepted that you will need half a day here, or you'll need a couple hours here, and that you can make up for that time.
No, I'm pleased you said that, Ethan. It's really important. I think the other thing that's important is it really is something that enables all our people who want to get engaged. And we had a period a while ago when we had some national charities and we gave money, and in some ways it didn't touch as many of our people, and I felt we were in that position where, I mean, giving money is never easy, but it's easier, and you sort of feel, well, that salves our conscience. We've now given some money to some good charities, but it didn't really engage you or our people more generally, and doing something where, of course, there is some money behind it. But the real value is that we've got our people spending time on it, applying their own skill, genuinely impacting people. And to me, that's the most powerful piece.
It's also quite a two-way thing. So I help organise the mentoring, and a lot of the mentors come back to me and say, actually, I've learned a lot from the students that I'm mentoring or going through that process. So we're also learning things and building.
No, I agree with that. No, I think you're right. I think we should see the advantage we get from being able to take part in it, as opposed to the advantage the recipients of the programme.
It's both.
No, Ethan, I agree.
Sure. I guess as we're on topical issues, you've mentioned it twice already, and I apologise to our listeners, but that's the B word, Brexit.
Yeah.
What do you think the future holds in store for Deloitte Northwest Europe after Brexit?
Yeah, I tend to think that whatever comes out, both as a UK economy and across Northwest Europe, we'll navigate it. I'm a sort of pragmatic optimist. I wouldn't choose to start from here. I think it's whatever your political views are, listeners, whatever your political views are, I think it's really unfortunate we are where we are. I think the UK has been diminished in the eyes of most of the world in terms of our reputation as a country just for stability and doing things well. But we are here. So I tend to believe whatever the shape of the deal and whenever it comes out, I tend to back UK business to make the best of that. The UK business environment is adaptable. It's shown that in the past. It's resilient. It will bounce back. And when you look at our firm across Northwest Europe, or North and South Europe, as we now call it, after the combination with Deloitte Central Mediterranean, we're going to have to adapt. And if it is harder in terms of moving people around, we have to adapt to that. But the underlying premise wasn't based on lots of people from outside the EU transferring into the EU or vice versa. It was based on the premise of mobility, of insight, mobility of knowledge, and some project mobility. So we're going to have to navigate that, as we do with Switzerland at the moment. So I'm pretty positive it will be fine. And what was really interesting was we've just gone through the Deloitte Central Mediterranean vote, and our partners in Italy, Greece, Malta, facing all the media, and I don't read much Italian media, but I imagine it's as much as we have here about what's happening with Brexit. They've still voted to join us. Northwest Europe, with the UK being part of it. So I think most of our partners and people see this as it's the right business decision. Business has to be borderless, and we'll have to navigate whatever the national borders are that are put in front of us. So there'll be some challenges, but I'm a pragmatic optimist that the country and our firm will come out of this stronger eventually.
It's encouraging. It's a nice antidote to all the sort of division that this country is seeing at the moment, to see actually the coming together of countries. So
yeah.
It's good to feel optimistic.
It was interesting. If you think back, we were right in the middle of going through the first phase of gold when the referendum came out. So we were on the campaign, we're on the road with all of our fellow firms in Belgium and Netherlands when the referendum came out. And I remember it was obviously that was the Friday. The Monday after that, I had to go to Brussels and present to our partners, and they were in shock. I had to convince them this wasn't me or our firm that had voted to leave the EU. But even through that, when you think about our partners in Belgium, Netherlands, 3 months later, still voted to come together, despite the uncertainty of Brexit and the referendum, because they still recognised that we have to be able to connect more globally to serve our clients, to give our people opportunities, and we want to do that in a way that retains that local leadership as well. So I think we've proved the merit of our firm, and we'll have to just do it again through Brexit.
So David, we've had a number of people around the firm who have contributed questions, but there's also a very special listener who had a question for you, and that's my 6-year-old son, Oliver, who is overly excited about the fact that his mummy is hosting a podcast. And I said to him, darling, is there anything you'd like me to ask our top boss at Deloitte? And he said, oh yes, could you ask him if he likes watching football? David, are you a football fan?
It's a great question.
I am a football fan, and I am a Chelsea supporter. So for those who support any other team, I'm sorry. So yeah, I am. I don't go as often live as I'd like to. I've got tickets at Wembley, so I went to see Chelsea lose to Man City in the well-known Caribou Cup recently, and I'll try and get to as many games as I can. And when I was young, I lived in southwest London, so my father used to take me up to Stamford Bridge all those years ago. So that's where I am.
Great question, Oliver. Who do Oliver support?
Well, Oliver has to really follow Daddy's team, which is Liverpool. So there's a sort of general feeling of foreboding in our house at the moment.
No, of course. So I must tell you, just the last time I had instance to deal with a question from a 6-year-old. I was at a school. And they asked me to go and speak to a younger group. So I was talking to the 18-year-old, would you speak to a younger group? I said, what am I going to talk to a young group about? They said, well, just talk to them about, what they talk to their bigger brothers and sisters about, what they do when they grow up. So I was talking to this group of, they're probably 8-year-olds, not 6-year-olds, about what do they think about, after school, and what do their brothers and sisters talk about. It's quite hard to talk about careers with 8-year-olds, so we're talking about this. And then I said to one of them, what does your big brother want to do? And he said he wants to go and he wants to work in this factory wherever he wants. And what do you want to be when you grow up? And he looked up at me and he said, I want to be an elephant, which sort of totally threw the conveation.
Yeah, so, definitely. Not sure how you respond to that.
I'm very careful with 6 and 8-year-olds now. I prefer the football question.
You never know what you're going to get.
I guess, David, we've tackled some important issues today, but another one is a question around whether you could put a number on the number of PowerPoint presentations you sat through in your time at Deloitte.
I couldn't put a number on them, too many. But what we have done, it's a great question. What we've done, just in our UK executive, we banned PowerPoint recently.
Oh, okay.
Excellent.
So we've now said, and it's sort of a pilot, because of some people, they can't operate without PowerPoint. I find that if I didn't see another PowerPoint again, I'd be pleased. So we tried going without PowerPoint, and because it's quite hard. If you say to someone, well, write the discussion point in just a one-page memo rather than PowerPoint, and we'll read the memo, then we'll have the discussion. And you can bring 2 slides to help facilitate the conversation, but don't send and it is quite hard because we've all grown up with PowerPoint as that crux.
Yeah,
so
it's comfort, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So yeah, too many to know.
No, it's good. It's good that we're innovating in this space.
Yeah. We've gone back to the written word.
One of the things that I thought was, what did you want to be when you grew up? I mean, presumably not an elephant.
No, I want to be a pilot. I'm very clear that so I can't go all the way back to that, but when I was at school, I wanted to be a pilot. And I always had this sort of fascination with air travel and being a pilot. And of course I didn't. I came here, but what I did do, I had a sabbatical back in about 2000. So I took 3 months off to get my private pilot's license. So even after all those years, it was still nagging away at the back of my mind that I wanted to be a pilot. So with my wife's support, she said she wouldn't come up with me if I passed my pilot's license. But with her support, I took a sabbatical and got my private pilot's license. So and it's sort of lapsed now. So maybe I'll pick it up again once I end this job. But that was always, it's very interesting. It's just. And I don't know what caused it. I have no relations who are pilots. Maybe I looked up at the sky and saw a plane or something. That was a pilot. So that was it. So in some ways, I got that childhood wish by getting my private pilot's license.
Was it everything you hoped for?
It's brilliant. No, I know I've lapsed it, but we were talking earlier about how do you deal with stress. To the extent there was stress, there is something about being in a light plane on your own, in the skies. Despite people saying London airspace is crowded, it doesn't feel that when you're up there, and you have to be in the moment. You're both relaxed because planes tend to fly themselves unless you're trying to land or take off, but also concentrate on that, and therefore everything else just clears. No, so it's a great place just to be yourself.
Are you quite good at switching off? Would you say?
Yeah. No, I am. No, I really am. Listen. I take work home. Not everyone takes work home, but I don't take it home emotionally. There may be papers and things I've got to look at. So I find it quite easy to switch off, as long as I'm connected. There's something about, if I know that I can connect if I need to, I find it quite easy to switch off. I remember my wife and I went for an anniversary trip. We went to Burma before they put in place 4G and everything else. And so you landed in Yangon, and your phone just doesn't work. There is no connectivity unless you find wireless in the hotel, and there wasn't that much. So I found being not able to connect quite stressful, actually. I felt there was something, in the end you just have to accept it, and you adjust. So but actually knowing that if I had to, or if someone had to connect with me, they can do, I find it very easy to switch off.
David, a question about sort of your visibility in the firm. Obviously everybody knows you, but clearly it's impossible for you to know every single member of staff. And I speak from personal experience that I was coming out of the lift in 2 New Street Square, probably a couple of years ago now, shortly after I joined Deloitte, and you were coming out of a lift opposite, and I grabbed my opportunity to say hello, and you were very kind, and you said hello back and asked which office I was in and what I did, and I thought this is nice, because I thought if I was a CEO, I'd probably want people to say hello to me.
Yep.
I could have that completely wrong.
No.
Do you like it when people say hello to you in the lift?
Yeah, I do. And often what I do in lifts often, because I don't think it's just me, it may be just me, but when people get in lifts, they tend to stop talking in lifts. So whenever I'm in a lift, I often just say, this is a talking lift. If you're in this lift, you have to talk, and you have to, what are you doing? Yeah, I think it's great, and I recognise your point, Lizzie, that probably the vast majority of people know who I am, and I won't know everyone. Yeah, I'd much prefer people said hello, and as I was coming over here, someone as I got in the lift did say, hello, you're David Sproul, aren't you? And I just joined 2 weeks ago. They must have seen the recruitment video or something. Yeah. So we had a nice chat, and so absolutely. But I try to make the effort as well. But just say, this is a talking lift. You can't come in here and be quiet. You don't want to talk. You have to get out.
Excellent.
That's a good policy. If you give the podcast a plug as well to anyone else.
Absolutely. No. Download the green room. Download the green room.
Very good. Very on message.
That's
there.
it.
Someone actually wrote in to ask, what time do you set your alarm in the morning, and do you have a sort of morning ritual or routine?
So I'm an early riser anyway. I've always been an early riser, right? And there's something mentally about getting ahead of the game, whether it's here or anything else. So I'm up early, but that's just because I like being up early. And even when I'm on holiday, my wife hates it, but I'm up early. So I'll be sitting out wherever we are at 7:30 having a cappuccino.
Putting the beach towels out.
Competing with someone else. But so I'm an early riser anyway. What is my morning ritual? So the one thing is I need a coffee. So I'll sometimes go to the gym, but the one thing is I can't operate without a coffee. And whether I do that before I leave or I do it on the way in and stop at whatever's open, Pret or whatever, that's probably the one thing. I just need a coffee. I need a coffee in my hand to actually start operating.
I think I just need my 8 hours. I think that's the key. Enough sleep.
Yeah.
So another question that was submitted is, what's the single best thing about being CEO of Deloitte?
Ooh, goodness, that's really hard. It's the ability to access any organisation and any conversation. And I probably didn't really realise that right at the beginning. But being the CEO of our firm gives you permission to be in any conversation. Now, you may have to work at getting to see the right people, and that's illustrated best, I think, at Davos. And Davos is for good and for bad an extraordinary way to sort of meet other business leaders. And it's a place where I and Richard went this year as well. You can meet anyone, because being there and being the CEO of our firm means that you are part of that conversation. And that plays back here as well. So I think probably it's access. It's if there's a dialogue going on that you think you want to be involved in, or I want to be involved in, or I think we as a firm should be involved in, then this card means you can get involved in that. You've got to be able to contribute something. You've got to have a point of view, have something to say. And if there's someone you need to see, then you may have to work at it. You may have to navigate how you get to see that person, but the card sort of gives you permission. So I'd say access is the biggest benefit you get from being CEO here.
Just a couple more questions, David. You'll be pleased to hear before we maybe do a few quick fire ones at the end. But one of my lists is who's the best celebrity you've ever sat next to on a flight?
Goodness.
Getting to the heart of the matter here.
Yeah.
Important question.
So I'm not sure they. Not sure they're going to. Necessarily impress the green room listeners. So I can think of three. Sienna Miller.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah.
She wasn't next to me; she was in the seat in front of me. But that was close. That was that.
Yeah.
Joan Collins.
Oh, right. Here we go. Yeah.
Was on one flight.
Did you get into conversation?
Yeah, I was going to say, did you chat to them?
I chatted to both of them. No, I chatted to both of them just to say, hello. And Sienna Miller was more chatty than Joan Collins.
I would have thought the other way around, actually.
And then again, I mean, these sort of all date me because I recognise these people. John Cleese was the other one I saw on a plane. So those are, I think over the last 4 or 5 years, those are 3 people.
Yeah,
I've
not
sort of
one
seen.
flight, because that would be quite.
No, it wasn't one flight.
Where were you flying
No,
to?
it's all separate times. But the truth is, as we all know, most people I see on the plane are just like you and me. And I'm sure real celebrities no longer fly, commercial or whatever it's called, British Airways or Ryanair or EasyJet, whatever it is.
Another question, David, that was submitted was, have you always been a strong public speaker, or is this something you had to learn on the job?
No, you learn it. I think it's like any skill, you can learn it. There's always that thing around that. You've got to be confident enough to want to stand up and do it. But yeah, I've learned it on the job.
What's your guilty pleasure?
Sweets, I suppose my wife would say. Yeah. So I'm if you saw me in my quiet moments, I just have a sweet tooth, which I have to work really hard to avoid succumbing to. And I have so I tend to try and avoid buying them. But if my wife buys, chocolates or sweets or anything, it's not just that I like it. It's just once I start, I can't stop. So she'll come back a day later and say, where was that? £half bar of chocolate, whatever it was. Bar of chocolate, I don't remember that at all. And I've managed to, if I've been in or something, it's gone. Yeah, someone else. No, that's probably certainly the only real guilty pleasure I'd admit to in the green room, but it's no.
We'll bear that in mind as we seek the sponsorship for this podcast. I think
exactly.
Confectionery brand on there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just to wrap up, we've got a quick fire round, I think.
Yep.
Ethan?
Yeah, so I've got some quick fire questions.
Okay.
So the aim of this is for you to just think on the spot,
Yep.
so not too much thought.
Yep.
Okay, fiction or non-fiction?
Fiction.
Email or phone call?
Phone call.
Flying or driving?
Flying.
Asking questions or answering questions?
Answering questions.
Job for love or job for money?
Job for love.
Film or theatre?
Theatre.
Snowy peaks or sunny beach?
Sunny beach.
Tie or no tie?
Tie.
Big party or small gathering?
Big party.
Early bird or night owl?
Early bird.
And finally, podcast or radio?
Podcast.
Hey.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Dave, for coming in. I guess if you could sort of perhaps try and answer this week's question in a nutshell as best you can. Is it tough at the top?
It's tough at the top at moments, but it's more than compensated by the fun you have in this job.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dave, for coming, and best of luck.
Thank you all very much.
Thank
It's
you.
been great. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. Next time, tune in as we ask our next big question. Does having a side hustle make you more productive at work? This podcast is produced by our very own pod squad and hosted by George Parrett, Lizzie Elston and Ethan Worth. Thanks to our creative studio for their technical support. Original music by Ali Barrett from our consulting team.